I just want to share a couple of stories about how I've really tried to influence the world around us, because I am only one person and we're all only one people, and sometimes I think about what can I do at the micro level, in terms of those systemic issues, because I want to get back to the systemic issues, because Shravan, I loved what you said around, I didn't love it, I hated to hear you say that, but what I mean, just, it exists today, but there's this sort of, it's this indirect stuff where you can't name it. In the 70s, you could, the microaggressions. Anyway, so, and the intersectionality that you were talking about, I think is really central to this and the world that we live in. So, that was context. But a couple of things that I've done, so that I hope contributes a little bit. When COVID was on, when we were going through the pandemic, I was hearing ministers of this state doing comparatives between Western Sydney and small suburbs outside of Western Sydney. And I'll name it because it's on the public record, but Janelli. So Janelli has a population of, I think, about 4,000 or 5,000 people, and comparing the numbers, COVID numbers in Janelli to southwestern Sydney. And feeling that in the media, feeling that was a comparable and valid, point. And not acknowledging that the numbers in Janelli, based on population, a percentage, are so much higher than what they are in southwestern Sydney. So why are we not focusing and assessing that more equitably and fairly and validly? So I was hearing this, and because it was a time that I was doing media interviews, so I did a lot of media interviews at the time, both national and metropolitan media and radio. I started drawing that in all my conversations. So when I get asked my first question, and I've been doing this ever since COVID, ever since 2020, and it's 2021, is my first answer to any question, doesn't matter if they ask me if the sky's blue, what I say is, let's just be clear from the outset that Greater Western Sydney is more than half the population of the Sydney metropolitan.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about the region and when we talk about different areas of our region and the diversity in our region, we're actually talking about almost 60% of the population of Sydney and about 40% of the population of New South Wales. So let's be clear, we're not talking about a microism. So I think from my perspective, and I've been using that line in every single media interview. I did one with The Guardian last week and I said it again. And I just to set the scene, let's be clear about that. So I think little things like that in terms of intersectionality, in terms of the region, and really identifying that it's not just this diverse little neighbourhood. Sorry, I'm going on, but the next example is I was invited to present to a central government agency about Western Sydney. They rang and said, look, we're coming to Western Sydney and we want to learn more about the diversity and so on. And we're coming to Parramatta. So would you come, and there's going to be 3 people on the panel, would you speak to the group? And they're policy decision makers that shape, central government agency that shape decisions for the people. And I turned up and looked around, looked at my panel colleagues, looked at who was in the room, and the room had about 40 people, so a lot of people for policy. And the first question I asked is, who lives in Western Sydney? And nobody, not one of them. I was the only person in the room that lived in Western Sydney. I saw the attendance list. I was also the only person in the room that had a foreign surname, or that that sort of thing. And the panel as well wasn't. And then I said, my second question was, who has been to Western Sydney? And 2 people put their hands up. Systemically, that this is a central government agency making really important decisions and wanting to, hear about the diversity of Western Sydney, so that could help them make good decisions about us. And it takes me back to the young people in Blacktown. What did they say?
Don't talk about us.
Don't talk about us without us.
Yeah.
And really,
So
so those little things is how, I am trying to find, and I spoke to that point, right? I'm trying to find little ways that I can sort of share our experiences.
And I think that touches on like one of the most significant things we can focus on, which is actually trying to push for improved diversity for people who are making decisions. And it's not just a box ticking exercise of let's get the multicultural person who's on the front counter at the hospital or the lawyer who will be on their annual reports, but actually thinking about who is in positions of power to make decisions, who is making policy. And that goes from local councils, who makes up local councils. I remember when I was young, living in Canberra Bankside Council at the time, but just looking at the makeup of the middle-aged white men on the council at the time and just kind of wondering, wow, but Bankside's so multicultural. And immediately that was my understanding of what systemic racism is, that those who are in power are not those from the community. And so you'll always have this gap, and that affects every aspect of the decisions they make. And that's where the systemic impact is so deep, because it impacts everything that builds the entire state. And I think we saw that during COVID and the health system, where I happened to have worked in that department and seeing how removed it was from Western Sydney, which troubled me a bit, and then just seeing how that looked like during COVID. That was very problematic to see that the huge gaps in communicating with Western Sydney, and the fact that it took so long to realise that, we're not actually going to be able to address this thing until we work with communities rather than policing them and otherising them. So, yeah.
We're always thinking about ways, how some of the conversations we have and the stories we share, how can we take it back to our spheres of influence? We talk about policies, plans, strategies. Where can we actually interject some of this to make sure it actually goes through into those spaces? Something that I'm sort of, again, utilising language, again, the Kim's language, how to use a racial equity index assessment tool to create unique ones that are specifically to different departments, different agencies, different structures, to make sure that if you are ever making a project, a decision, a policy, a plan, if the people you are doing this for is not represented, if they're not co-designing this, it's a piece of paper with typing on it. That's all it's ever going to stay as. So I think that I'm trying to utilise the language in a spaces of power and in a way that structures can understand. And data is a space that we're going into super rapidly. Yet there are community groups who are not going to be actively a part of the census data. They're not going to be actively part of the referendum. They're not going to be actively part of a consultation process because there's lack of trust, there's exposure, there's experiences that are at play, right? So how do we make sure that if you are, doing these policies, creating and developing these, what is your role? Again, that notion of allyship. How are you going to make sure that there's justice, there's equity, there's inclusion, intersectionality at part of that process? So I think calling it out is really important. To see something in front of you going, well, I can't see where you've incorporated that voice. Well, I'm not going to be part of it until that's incorporated. Pushback is important. So how can I be part of my process? My voice is not already there from the get-go. So I think that, again, when we talk about truth-telling, which has been coming up over the last couple of years now with First Nations leaders, especially First Nation women, have been so incredible voices in the space. That notion of truth-telling, what does truth-telling mean? And how does that then impact us as people who are either part of the structure, supporting the structure, trying to modify the structure, or dismantling the structure? I think we need to really understand that role and utilise language in the spaces of power and influence at all times.
Also, I think while we are on the topic of language, and I think as an organization, external facing to influence our practice of the decision-making process, it is also important for us to push the decision makers to understand the meaning behind the practices that people come and do. You know how Uncle was explaining about sleeping on the ground and sleeping on the bed. There is a lot of meaning behind the things that our ancestors have put in place. It's not okay to just write like Happy Diwali in different languages and put a poster on the wall. That's not it. That's not what we want. We want you to believe that we speak different languages, so we want you to come to us and ask us what we need when you're planning for a COVID clinic or when you're planning for the urgent emergency thing in the suburb that we live in. It's okay, it's great to have a festival greeting in our language, but it should go beyond it. It should not stop there. It's becoming like a tick box that to put a hijab person on the face and hey, this is multicultural. And you know, like if there was a white English ritual that happens in a church, that's, oh my God, this is good. Same as if an Aboriginal person doing a smoking ceremony or Indian person doing a puja in somewhere. This is old, this is ritualistic, this is black magic. You know? This is the influence as an organization that we have to put a face at. We do beyond this because it shows the impact. This is not to do as a tick box thing.
So I went to a turnout one day to give a talk, and this politician got up and spoke. He said, oh, this country is starting to become a multicultural country. And I got up and said, this has always been a multicultural country because of the diverse of the tribes that live here, you know, from different nations. And then I talked about the thing, that's all I said to him, but the thing what I say, because I grew up in Eastern Shores of Botany Bay, a place called Upperus, and I grew up in Aboriginal Reserve. And the old people there, they taught me everything they knew. One of the main things was always show respect, acknowledge, never be greedy, and always share. And the thing was, the other thing they taught us was about conservation. So there's, you don't take all the fish out of the creek, you don't take all the berries off the trees, you know, you just sort of take a little bit here and there. And they said, when you go out, these stories don't belong to you, they said. When you go out, you share these stories with the people out there. It's not just for our people, but for non-Aboriginal people too. Because they said that non-Aboriginal people are part of our heritage and culture, always was and always will be. They always said that. But they never, I remember the old people never spoke about racism, you know, out there in the community. They never spoke about that. But it's just something that was, never existed. And the beauty of the old people that taught me everything I know to take on to the next generation, these old people, they only went past fourth class, third or fourth class. There was no high school. They didn't get to fifth or sixth class. And they had to move out to make room for the next lot of kids coming through. So they only went past fourth class, the old people. But, and all that wisdom and knowledge, where they get it all from? So it must have been all, they're listening to the past elders, and before them, they sort of bring it up today, and learned a lot of that stuff to share with non-Aboriginal people.
I think that Western Sydney Community Forum and through this working group is in a really unique position. Because I think what's important in that story, Uncle Greg, for me, is the social justice element. So when you had multicultural communities, there was still a sense of social justice, equity, everyone's equal, everyone has a contribution to make. And I think that's what we need to return to. So centering First Nations and the experience and the lives, how their lifestyle, what they did, how the tribes interacted with one another is critical. And I think we're in a really unique position to influence the organisations, you know, as a leader within the community sector, I suppose we have to acknowledge that not everybody in the sector is there to achieve human rights and social justice. They're there to help people, they're there for good reasons, but I think for us to be able to say these are some of the practices that we've looked at internally and share that with the sector, it might assist in making change even in small ways, you know, for one person even. But yeah, knowing that not everybody in our community sector is there for social justice and for human rights, you know, using a human rights framework. And I think there's been many learnings. It's been such a journey. So sharing that, I think, will be critical. And I think it's about returning to that sense of community, different communities, diversity, multicultural life, but with a sense of social justice.
It's just like people, they got to read books to learn something. But lots of us, we learn from the old people and their old ways. And the thing is that we've got to live that life to understand what goes on in the world, you know. We've got to learn, you know, we've got to live that life, because books are not going to help us. You go to university, open up a book, and they'll go to chapter this and that. There's nothing in there, but if we went home listening to our old people, they have more to tell us than what's in that book. And one of the most important things they talk about, as I said before, they talk about respect, acknowledge, never greedy, and always share. And the thing is, when I talk about common sense, they say, oh, there's no such thing as common sense. I said, yes, there is. If you was taught about old-fashioned values, then you will know about common sense. So that people never give themselves a chance to sit around with old people and listen to them tell the stories. I'm just talking about my old people, and the same as the diverse of you lot here, sitting around with your old people and listening to the stories they experienced when they were kids, and your grandparents, gone through the same thing, you know. Mm-hmm. So, what's the old saying says, if you don't know where you're going, you can end up anywhere. Mm-hmm. So the thing is, we need to sit down and listen to the old people. That's why I keep on telling a lot of my people, go on to the old people while they're still alive. Because I can't tell you anything, because you come from another tribal area, like over the mountain, Wiradjuri people, or Barkindji country up in Brogadil and Kenya. I said, I don't come from those places. So you got to go home, because our customs are entirely different.
And Angela, that means a lot to me, because my ancestors are Indigenous people to the regions now known as Iran, Iraq, southeast Turkey. And when there are no books, because there's been oppression, when there's been oppression against your language, when everything you know about your culture, that's, you know, something that you can read or whatever, is written by colonisers and other powers, it's critical that the stories, the oral histories, the old people, that's the only way you get the truth.
Yeah, true.
Otherwise, going to a book is just going to tell me a narrative that's been written by someone else with power that's come to change it. Is that?
Well, it's the same thing what I said earlier, that reading stories in the Bible, that a lot of those stories come from our people. They go around and spoke to our people about their stories. This is how they made these Bibles and all this Testament, whatever you like to call them. That's where it all, read all that in there. And you know what I've got at home, I've got the Quran, and it's exactly the same as the Bible. Same stories. same thing. But the thing is, that's what I was saying, that's where all the stories come from, is our people.
That idea of storytelling and listening to elders is something that continuously sticks with me as we're working in this project. Because, and I think I've said this in some of our meetings, it's a sense of anxiety for me, because there will come a time inevitably where the elders that we have now have like gone on. And are we using the time that we have at this point in time to get as much information?
Yeah.
So as much as the current books or the things that we have access to might be written by the voices of powers that were over us, for me, part of it is doing sessions like this, recording the stories that you share with us, the both of you that share with us, because there will come a time that I'm not here, but someone else in my lineage will say, there was this Uncle Greg fella, he was pretty smart, pretty smart man, right? There was Auntie Carol, and they can also access those stories. So part of it for me, coming to the policy and the practice, is how do we embed the things that we know now and the traditional knowledge that we are gaining and embedding it into our future intergenerational investing, right? And then another aspect, coming to like the individual and the personal and the everyday life, is for me is recognizing where some of our daily practices come from. When we're doing yoga is not intrinsic to me and my people. Like, that's not what we do. But acknowledging where that comes from. When we're having our acai bowls and being Instagrammers and doing all of that kind of stuff, and now we're learning about deep breathing and meditating and being grounded, like, we need to acknowledge where that knowledge came from. And I think that's really important when we are talking to people that are in decision-making spaces, people in formal roles of authority, and bring the personal back into that professional life. That all of these systems of oppression and the people that you are oppressing and things you're trying to keep out have kind of constructed your entire existence and has brought richness to it outside of food and the delicacies and the music and the dancing, outside of those fun cultural things. So it's definitely part of the personal and recognizing where our everyday practices come from and understanding that history. Also preserving the voices of our elders in ways that our future generation can access. And then 3 is, I am fortunate to be surrounded by incredible people. And those who are of African descent particularly, when you come in black skin, you are automatically an advocate for whatever. Your mere existence is going to be a political statement one way or another. If you do your hair a certain way, it means you're leaning into your Afrocentric self. If you have more European, Eurocentric hair, it's like now you're neglecting your history and your ancestry and whatever else, if your name sounds like this, whatever, so on and so forth. So for those whose mere existence is a political statement, myself included, it's creating spaces to just be and creating resources and opportunities so that those voices can be shared, so that that next generation can be in those positions of decision making. I will name drop some little projects like Code Breakers. It is at the very foundation and at the very core of Code Breakers that it is how do we upskill young people so that they can be champions of community and social harmony. Things like paying people for their knowledge, for their time. We can't just go and harvest people because you are so culturally diverse and you have all this lived experience. Give it to us for free so at least we can tick this. If it was any other kind of consultancy, from engineering to marketing to whatever else, we would pay premium price for that and we would have no issue. We would look for the money. The same needs to be done when we're looking at these systems. And I think the forum does that really well, adopting the policy of paying people for their expertise, and also paying young people for their contribution, and things like the anti-racism working group. So yeah, threefold: acknowledging our daily practices and where they come from, collecting the voices of elders so that they can be with us and guide us continuously, and then paying for the expertise.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that. I just want to go back to what you were sharing about how to make that a reality. About not just celebrating Diwali, not appropriating, not just meeting you because that's the week that Diwali gets celebrated, but connecting to you, understanding your culture, understanding why you practice that. I think there's so much value in keeping it relational. Because when I keep it relational, I'm now accountable. So when I go, oh, actually, I'm not going to pay her quite the right amount, I'm going to go with this because that I can cut back on the budget. My relational keeps me honest, it keeps me transparent, it keeps me at a place where I see you as my equal. Like you talked about extraction, that has been happening forever. Forever about, as I know for myself as a migrant, this notion of I'm grateful to be in Australia. Thank you so much for giving me a passport. And then learning, hold on, I now have connections to Uncle Harry, I have connections to Uncle Greg, and now their stories have opened my eyes in such profound ways. And it wasn't just one story, over many, many years. And again, Uncle Greg, I'm always grateful for your patience because, sometimes it doesn't click in straight away. It doesn't. It took me many, many years, but that relational connection now makes me honour him even if he's not in the room. And I think that that's what we need to keep ourselves accountable, and we are engaging with anybody from our offices, when we're at forums, when we're sitting down giving consultation for policy development, what relational contribution am I actually bringing to this conversation? Is it just me and how I'm going to benefit and what I'm going to get out of it, or is it me and then whoever else I have connections to that I'm sitting within that space? I think that has really been profoundly different for me, because now I don't see myself as just me and my voice. I see myself with everybody who's contributed to shaping my voice. I honour them. I try to honour them in every way I possibly can by saying, thank you for taking that time with me, because now I'm going to hustle for you here. Because it means a lot.
What you were saying there, it took you a while, to click in. Because our old people, only Carol will tell you this, when old people used to sit us down and tell us a story, sit out under a tree somewhere, It's the best place to learn is under a tree or down there along the riverbank, because you can take your shoes off, touch the ground. And but the old people, they tell us a story, and if we go back the next day, they tell us a story, same story. They keep repeating themselves, make sure it's sunk in. And they didn't just tell us that. They didn't tell us that once, but they sort of into us, and they kept telling us the same story.
Such a gift, Uncle.
So we couldn't, what's that? Because I remember years ago, this old man, we sit around under the tree and listen to this old man tell the story, our uncle, and every time we tell a story, he started laughing. And we thought there was something wrong with him, we looked at one another, something wrong with the old fellow. And then we went back the next day, he told him the story, and he started laughing again. Went about 3 times, we went and saw him. And then when we was walking away, you could hear him laughing, and when we looked back, he laughed loud. And he was only about 5 or 6, 7 years old. And we couldn't work out what he was trying to tell us. And I remember when I was about 19 or 20, I was going to the shop to get a few little groceries, milk and bread. And I started to think about this old man who was telling me these so-called stupid stories. And that's when it clicked in. I said, now I know what that old fellow was trying to tell me. But we weren't supposed to pick it up until we got to a certain age. when I got to that certain 19 or 20, I realised what he was trying to tell us. It's amazing because our people are the greatest counsellors in the world, our old people.
That connects back to what Anita was saying, how we can preserve and give it to the next generation, because the written history is always, power plays a big role. That has always been across the globe. But what remained true and authentic was the oral stories that came from our elders. Repeating and putting it into the brains of the next generation is the gift that elders like you give us. So amazing.
Well, what I've been writing a book for the last 20 odd years, 20 years, and I've got to get back into it and complete it because I can't wait to leave one of the books here. And the thing is, they said to me, "What's the name of the book? You get a title for your book." I said, "Yeah, I've got a title. I've thought up something." They said, "What is it?" I said, "I'm calling my book Learning Through the Eyes of My Elders." That's the name of the book.
Well,
And there's a lot of spiritual stuff in there, a lot of cultural stuff, and there's a lot of emotional stuff. When you get to something that gets a little bit emotional, you might get a little bit teary-eyed. So you come to the next chapter, here I'm talking about something stupid that we did, and then you start laughing about it, you know, and then sort of you come back to yourself again. So that's how I got this book written. So
We want to see that finished very soon.
yeah.
Please, we want to see that copy.
Yeah, I'm going to leave one here, right? Because it'll be very important. Because it's going to educate non-Aboriginal people, everyone around the world, when they look at that book. Because some of the things in our culture, like you would have done, your great-grandparents would have done something similar in the old country. I remember old Nans used to do that, what you're talking about. Because I was talking about something one day to this girls at a school. I was talking about remedies our old people used, and there was a South American teacher. And I'm talking about what the old people used to do. They used to get us kids to go down the bush during summertime and collect all these spiders, built these big webs, you know, and we'd get these spiders. Take them back to the old people. I said, "Now you take your spiders to your house, you take yours to your house, you go to your house. We're to take them to our own homes." And they used to say, "Just tip them all out around the house." So we just tip the spiders out around the house. In the afternoon, there'd be a big web outside your window. And you leave the window wide open on a hot night, and the flying insects couldn't come in because they'd get through that web.
Wow. So incredible.
Yeah, so they're very smart, the old people, the way they didn't go by more tea, really.
No, mucho lo que las